Should we have our code up so we look like hackers? Oh, I didn't see it there. You caught me hacking my Mac. It's one of the many things I do here at EmberMap's office. We should just have poop emojis over our heads. We should use my iPhone X's AR tracking feature to superimpose poop emojis during the entire podcast. We could actually...
I knew setting up the camera was a bad idea.
An emoji. But you don't understand. Our audience needs to see us conducting Ember interviews and questionnaires with the poop emoji.
With emojis.
And the computer emoji. And emojis are actually pretty fun. Man, that's such a... I just created a new startup idea. I'm so proud of myself. What if they could choose the animal? I know we're getting way off topic. What if they had it, but they could choose it?
You could choose?
Yeah, you can change it because the data is just the data. It's just the face tracking data.
So like someone's a guest and you don't really like them. Like you disagree with someone and you're like, I'm going to give you the poop emoji.
Exactly.
But then they kind of like recover. They say something you like.
You
and
switch
you're like,
them to the unicorn.
I'm going to upgrade you. Well, we're not going to go all the way to the unicorn. We're just going to go. Then you go poop emoji at ice cream cone.
Ice cream cone, right. Because
you know the ice cream cone is just a poop emoji with a different color.
I did know that. Yeah. Welcome to the EmberMap podcast, where we talk about design and development in the world of Ember.js. I'm Sam.
I'm Ryan.
And if you like what you hear today, you can find more of our work at embermap.com. So how's your week been going?
Good. Working on a few Ember apps, an add-on, all front-end and UI code. No Rails, no back-end stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, feeling the pain.
It's still the longest part of our work, huh?
Yeah. Side note, I worked on a feature for EmberMap where I had to like import all this data, set up all these database tables. I had like synchronizing our data with our data in Stripe, and that was like 5% of the development effort. And then like 95% of the development effort was getting a loading spinner to show up inside of a button. So yeah, it's good times in the UI world.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, I wonder if it's going to change. Like I saw something on Twitter, and they were talking about, it was TJ Holloway-Chuck, from Express. Yeah. And he was talking about the AWS stuff that came out. All the cloud functions, the cloud, how they do it in the cloud with the computers. And he was saying, like, there's a lot of startups. He said something like, "Oh, there go a bunch of startups."
Yeah, every AWS or Apple keynote, 5 startups go out of business.
Right, exactly. And he was kind of saying it was like a good thing because you want to make all that stuff as easy as possible because the UX is where the value is. Like the UX is where the innovation's happening. Like better UX, better interfaces is where value is going to be delivered. It's not like new ways of storing data, kind of in a roundabout way. He was saying that, so that was interesting. Maybe UX will be hard forever.
No, I think we're still in the early days, and we just see these massive leaps every year. But I think there'll be diminishing returns at some point in the future.
Right. I imagine back-end engineers probably couldn't have imagined where we are today in terms of DevOps, server, database stuff 20 years ago. If you would have said, "Oh yes, auto-scaling databases and not worrying about sharding," like when's the last time we've had to worry about any of that stuff?
Yeah, never. And to be fair, that stuff moves super quickly too.
Yeah.
Like all this container and Kubernetes and all this stuff is.
That's true. Cool. So you were working on Storefront.
Yeah. I added a new API for loading a collection of models. So extremely similar to Ember Data's Find All. In fact, under the hood, it just calls out to Ember Data. But the whole idea here is Find All will go to the backend and fetch your data, return a promise, and that promise fulfills when the backend responds with data. However, if there's data already in the store, that promise instantly fulfills and does a background reload. So there's like a scenario. Let's say you go to the post/1 page, which loads, post with ID 1. You see that blog post, and then you go back to the post index page that loads all the posts. Well, because that post with ID 1 is already in the store, Ember data is going to immediately return an array with one post in it, post ID 1, and then do a background reload. So since that array immediately returns,
your UI will render.
Yeah, your template renders with one blog post on its index page, and then 200, 300 milliseconds later, the rest of the blog post render.
Right.
So you get this this flash of changing content.
Right.
And it's really jarring.
Right. And it's not usually what developer intended. So the reason find all returns synchronously sometimes is because they want to make it easy for Ember developers to take advantage of the cache. It's this is a hard part of stateful programming. It's different from the server rendered model. And it's if you want to just see all the posts in my store, find all is supposed to be the developer saying, return everything I know about, and then maybe get a fresh payload from the background.
Right. So if you use that example I just brought up, if you start at the index page, go to post 1, and then go back to the index, you want that. You already have all the index data loaded when you're returning to it. So it should just instantly render.
Right.
So that's a case that find all. Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah.
But the other way, it's jarring.
So what's the solution?
So what we have is load all. And what load all does is load all looks at the query. It looks at what you're doing. So it's not how much data is in your store, if there's any data in your store. It's have I run this query against the backend? If you have, it's the same API as find all. It's going to
resolve synchronously if it's done it.
Yep, instantly fulfill, give you the data from the previous call, and then do a background reload. However, if you've never run this query, it will go, blocking promise, goes off to the server, fetches data, and then fulfills. And the nice thing here is it's aware of your query. So if you do pagination, it remembers the pagination. If you do filters or JSON API includes.
That's awesome.
So yeah, if you've loaded page 1 and you go back and you're back on page 1, it's going to instantly give you page 1, that data set from page 1.
And that's different. Store.query never caches. Store.findAll always caches.
Yeah. So this is the middle ground of store.query and store.findAll.
Right. It sounds like a lot how find record works. Find record is what you want in the sense of you're declaring on this route, this is the data I need. If I already have it, then render it, otherwise fetch it. And you don't run into a lot of these issues with one record by ID, right? Because you know the record by ID.
Find record can get you in trouble because find record isn't query aware.
Right.
So if you load a record with no includes and then you try to load a record again with includes, it won't fire off that query because it says
sparse field sets or something like that. So we've run into that before where you have the record loaded from the master of the master detail, but it's not fully loaded. So you end up doing these hacks around it. So really what you want is a way at the route level to say this route needs exactly this data, like what you're saying, whether you're loading a single record, having it have some includes, querying a collection, and so on. Yeah. Now, what about if you were to do something like you query page 1 and then the user creates a new post and then goes back to the index, and now page 1 is different.
So the query, if you're using the I queried page 1, that's your result set. So creating a new post won't add to that result set. Now you could
So in this case, you would need to say some logic and say maybe the client's a bit smarter about what the first page is as a result of some user changes or something like that.
Or I would say at this point, if you know there's new data on the server, you can just reload.
Right.
So it's just like store.query in the sense that you can pass, reload true.
So you can force a reload. So if you're coming from a creation route or something like that, you could say, make sure, basically I've invalidated. It's almost like you want to be able to say after this action, that previous query is now invalid. Yeah,
exactly. And the invalidation is interesting because I want to build up on top of this. Again, this is all just wrapping Ember data. So I'm not creating this new data model type thing. It's just
an opinionated way to use Ember data's APIs.
But back to that invalidation with these queries, I want to be able to say that this query is valid for an hour. So that if you do run a query and it's been longer than an hour, it will do a force reload. So that's a future API. I know how I want it to work at a high level, but I haven't flushed out all the details. So soon, but
that's cool. Yeah, it makes sense that you would want it makes sense you'd want a first class API for invalidation, since this is all basically about caches.
Yeah.
Which is all about invalidation.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, your front end is like a distributed data store of your back end.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely want a way to say, I have some data, it might be a little stale, refresh it.
And I guess in Ember Data, you can do that with should background reload. If you were, I think I had an app at TED where I set a timer.
Yeah. And then should background reload
became true.
But here's the thing with like should background reload, like those adapters, I don't really want to configure this at an adapter level.
Right.
I want this. I mean, maybe it's an adapter.
It's really the route that feels
right.
like.
Yeah. It's why am I loading this data? Who am I loading it for?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about this when I'm working on the feature at the route and template and controller level.
Right. Interesting. So that's really cool. So that's, and if you ever did want, what would be, if we were thinking about what would be our favorite or ideal way to represent like the current behavior of find all, where it's everything in the store. But then I was thinking, really, you already have store.pcall. Like if what you want to show is what you've loaded in the store, then you should use store.pcall. And that reminds me of the Hoover app I had, where didn't care how the data got loaded. And it wasn't displaying the data from a query. It was just displaying whatever it knew about, and you could pump data in there with a WebSocket or whatever. So it's like, it really feels like what you want is to be as declarative as possible, right? And say, here's the needs of this route. It's either the server model as of this time, it's whatever the Ember app knows about as of this time. It's getting away from the imperative model where you click a link and then show what happened as a result, because sometimes there's a difference between what you load and what you want to show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just adding a few of these rich APIs makes that a lot easier. That's cool.
Yep. And I mean, the implementation, if you look at the source code, it's super simple. It's just delegating to a bunch of different Ember data calls. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you learned about some of the internals of Ember data.
Yeah. Yeah, Ember data has great primitives here. So it's super easy to write. And again, definitely don't want to replace Ember data, because that's just too much maintenance work.
A ton of work's been gone into it.
So, ideally I want something where, some higher level APIs, but I can always drop down to Ember data. That's like a huge, huge driving principle of this.
Right.
I want to use Ember data, and I want, I'm familiar with Ember data. Everyone else is familiar with Ember data.
Right. Now the API it's I think I saw it was Storefront. I think originally we were adding methods to store, but now we have a Storefront service.
Yeah, there's a Storefront service,
which is an extended version of Store.
No, it's its own.
It's its own thing, and then it just delegates.
Yeah. This is still work in progress as far as what the API will be, but I don't think we should clobber Store.
Right, because if you're an Ember developer and you open it and you see store.load, you might be confused. Yeah. But if you see Storefront, okay, it's very clear.
You know where you need to look. Yep.
Right. Nice.
You know what you need to put into Google.
Right, exactly.
So last week we were traveling, which is always fun. And I think we were at the airport, and we went to get an Uber, and it was just a disaster, right? There was I think there were 50 people out there, and there's just two little spots that are designated for Ubers. I think this was New Jersey, but San Francisco is just as bad too.
Right.
Uber drivers are trying to pull in. There's no room. There's too many people. There's a cop there screaming at them. And we were kind of thinking, you made a comment that, a programmer would never design a system like this, because it's all just this huge built up, you can't move anything around. You made a comment that, programmers design things to be disposable, so that when something like Uber comes along, you can, rearrange your airport
because the
parking.
Streets were made 100 years ago.
Yeah, they were made. They didn't
completely different time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They couldn't imagine these fast pickups, everyone going to the curb at once. Even when there was a cab stand, it's like a nice orderly line.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I just, that really stuck with me, this idea of designing for disposable code.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just, talk about when in an Ember app we build things that are disposable, meant to be thrown away.
Yep.
How do we decide those disposable boundaries?
Yep.
It's about as much thought as I put into this. So.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. The first thing it makes me think of is DHH talks about rewriting Basecamp 3 or 4 times or something like that in its 10-year life, or I guess 15 years or whatever, however long it's been around. And that's pretty interesting. it also makes you think about, the Sandy Metz quote about duplication being cheaper than the wrong abstraction. That's so true.
Absolutely.
If you open an app and there's one tree of it, subtree of the app that's just a bunch of code, but it's not shared with any of the rest of the app, it's just so easy to get rid of. We've done that so many times.
I mean, oftentimes too, when I'm first writing a feature, I have no idea what the final API is going to look like. Like I have a vague idea, but I don't know concretely what the API is going to be.
Yep.
So I would much rather start duplicating code than rushing right to abstraction, because if I get it wrong, it's really easy to throw away.
Yep. Yeah, this is a hard one. Right now I'm working on some of the styles of EmberMap's code base, and there's a ton of stuff I want to get rid of. Just trying to boil it down to the simplest possible unit that describes all of the visual styles in the app. And I'm glad we have tests, and that makes it easy to throw away code. Like tests make it super easy to throw away code.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to think about what the behavior is, again, not tied to the implementation. I mean, there's a lot we could talk about there, but I'm trying to think of like Ember apps specifically, what I've seen people mess up. I mean, I think about things like these like generic route handlers, or generic like the CRUD actions that they extract to like a mixin or a superclass, and every single route uses that.
Mixins and routes, I think, are a clear sign of non-disposable code.
Yeah, exactly. I think when I started writing Ember, or like a couple of years ago, I would have seen something like that and not really known what to say against it. But now, especially when I code myself, I'm just, if I'm coding a new feature, I just code that new feature. I mean, components are a great way to reuse functionality, because they're compositional. Like they don't tie your app together in these weird ways. So,
well, on that components too, like they're disposable, right?
Yes.
You have a component that does some functionality. You can create a new component that does the same functionality, render them side by side, play with them a little, and then throw the old one away.
Yep.
So I think thinking in terms of components really does help you write a disposable code base.
It's true. And then because you open a template and you see the component tree, and you can just see, if I have this stuff up here and this stuff down here, I can just get rid of all this stuff. It's like a very powerful way to see the isolation. Whereas if you open a code base and you're looking at a class that extends or inherits from, you're looking at the file structure and there's just 100 classes there. You have no idea how they're related. But it's really nice when you're working on a template to just see that tree and be able to just throw away things, comment out things, and not break a bunch of stuff. So yeah, that's good.
Nice.
I was upgrading EmberMap's code base yesterday, which is why the site was down this morning.
Nice.
I messed up a config variable. It was awesome. I used Ember CLI update, which is sweet. Have you used it yet?
No, I haven't.
It's awesome.
What? How is it different from like Ember? What is it, like Ember init, where it regenerates everything? How is it different from that?
The thing is that Ember init isn't smart, so it doesn't. It says, "Don't you think your router file should be this?" But it's like, no, I have my routes defined.
Right. It tells you. It gives you like a blank router file.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, do you want to like diff it, replace it?
Exactly. And so what this does is from Kelly Selden, and I installed it as a global, so I just have it on my system. So I've done it twice now. You just go into an Ember project and you just type in Ember CLI update. Ember-CLI-update, and then it knows you're in an Ember app, and it just gets the latest version. And then you use like the git diff tool, which I hadn't had a lot of experience with, which is really interesting. Have you used that before? It's like, normally if I was working on open source and I had a conflict, I would type like git status, I would see which files were conflicts, I would open them in my editor, I would see like the brackets and like fix them, delete the code I didn't want, just save what I did, and then git add, and then...
Interesting. So I do that, but my editor has a diffing tool built into it, so I can select which one I want, or I can.
So that's basically what this git diff tool. I guess it's probably just my git. It's probably the default diff editor that my computer is set up with. But yeah, it basically lets you go through that. Anyways, just an easy way to go through systematically each thing that changed. So you run that, and then it does it, and most of the work is done for you. And it did this time. It did like all this code mod stuff too, because of the imports API.
So you're no longer importing Ember from Ember, you're importing
component from @ember/component, all this stuff. But it changed the whole project over really easily. So basically got rid of all the globals, which is really cool. And I saw he's working on something that lets you experiment with tree shaking. So I guess that's kind of what this is leading up to. But yeah, it's an awesome tool. So anyways, I was upgrading, and the tool does the core Ember CLI, like the core Ember app files, right? App.js, index.html, your test helpers, things like this. But then you have all your custom add-ons. And part of the hard part of upgrading is, when add-ons change versions, and maybe they have a breaking API change or something like that, and you don't know that. So like you're upgrading and you have all your dependencies, and like you're going from Mirage 03 to 04, and you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to upgrade that because, maybe I need to. Maybe it says it doesn't work. This was the thing that happened, is one of the add-ons said it doesn't work with the version of Ember 217, which we were on now. So you're like, okay, I need to upgrade it. So what do you do?
I usually go to the GitHub. I open up the change log. If there's no change log, I look at issues and commits.
Yeah.
Usually commits. Yeah.
It's a huge pain, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I have no confidence in my ability to judge any of this stuff correctly.
Right.
So I just sort of guess. I rely on our test suite.
Right.
That's the only thing that makes me think that I can get away with this stuff.
Right. So I used I was using Yarn and also npm, and you can run npm outdated, and it shows you what you currently have, what npm would give you if you reran npm install right now with your current package.json. So let's say, if you had 0.3 with a caret, like basically 0.3.x, and the first time you ran npm install, you got 0.3.1, and then there's an 0.3.4. So it's like if you ran npm install now with the fresh node modules, you get 0.3.4. But then it also shows you like the latest release, which may be like 0.4.0 or 1.0 or something like that.
Yep.
So since we had jumped from like 2.12 to 2.17, like a lot of the dependencies that we use, the add-ons, jumped like one or two major versions even. So I was like, I should just go through and do this, And most of it was pretty easy. Composable helpers was an example where when they went to 2.0, they removed HTML safe, which we were using for our blog posts.
Interesting.
Into string helpers add-on. So
string helpers, like
Ember CLI string helpers.
Okay, it's just like a bunch of template string helpers, right?
Exactly. It's literally just the ones that they used to have in composable helpers that are just for strings. They've moved it into a separate add-on.
Awesome.
So it's like you just install that and it works.
Now, how did you know that was missing?
So I upgraded it, realized there was a problem in composable helpers from an error in the test suite, and then I went to composable helpers. Sometimes I click on releases because people publish important notes there, but the changelog also has stuff there. So I'll also open the changelog like you said, and then I'll just look for the major version, because usually people in Ember I find are pretty good. Like if they're going to do something that requires a client to change code, then they'll publish it in the major version of the changelog.
Yep.
And so that's exactly what it said. The project said, all the string helpers have been extracted to your project. If you're using any of these, just install that. But I was just thinking, like, man, remember when they started auto-upgrading browsers and iPhone apps?
Yeah.
And just how you don't have to worry about it anymore? And like how much time we spent opening the app store when we first got iPhones and upgrading apps? It just made me think, like, why is this not something we're working towards in development community, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess your things aren't depending on APIs provided by your iPhone app, where like
your data is, though. I mean, your data in your iPhone is.
But the boundary is around the app. The boundary is around, like, there's not like one app that's using some API from another app. So the apps are self-contained. So I think you can get away. At least it's easier to upgrade those. I mean, maybe.
What about the security update on Mac that auto updated?
Well, unless you were writing code that logged in as root, I don't think you have to worry about it.
But I'm just saying, like, it seems funny to me that was a very strange thing when it first came about, and now it's so obviously the right thing. Think about browser updates getting it. Think about how nice it is as a developer to know our users are on latest versions of browsers.
Right. Or not only that, just how many times did you know what version of Internet Explorer you had?
Exactly.
I can't tell you what version of Chrome we're on.
Exactly.
I know it's around 60 something, but I can't tell you.
Exactly. So it made me think, okay, so the auto update thing would be really cool. I get there's issues there. I think they can be fixed. I think it can be solved. But at the least, I thought, what about you're sitting there upgrading Ember, and so what if I publish a new version of Mirage and I deprecate this API? And usually if you're really good, you can tell people, if you're really responsible as an add-on author, you can use deprecations. And so you can say, okay, go to 3.9. If you clear all the deprecation warnings, you can just go to 4x and you'll be fine. But that still requires a bit of work. What I really wanted was in the CLI right there when I was upgrading Ember to be told from the output, like Ember outdated or Ember upgradable or whatever. And it shows me the add-ons and it says, okay, the only ones I care about are like composable helpers. If you jump to 2, this is the only thing you need to know is this single upgrade note that says, if you're using these, install string helpers.
So it's something like a change log that can read in your code and kind of match things up.
I think it's even easier. I think if you had structured data in your changelog, which most people do, but if you had something that said like upgrade notes for this release, things that you absolutely have to know if you're, again, from the perspective of someone, because most of the people think about this stuff, obviously there's people who are intimately involved in projects and want to know every change, but most people, when they use this stuff, is in this situation. You're upgrading your app.
Will it work?
Will it just continue to work like it did before? That's really all they want to know.
Yep.
And so I feel like there's a place there where you have something that writes to the screen that says, you're using Liquid Fire, you need to bump this to 27.1, and you need to do this thing. You're using composable helpers, you need to install string helper. It's just all right there.
So this would be like a data structure in the changelog that just knows.
I think Ember CLI could definitely query GitHub's API and look for something in the changelog. Or I was even thinking if GitHub's API exposes the releases, then if people use releases, then you could query major releases and you could look at the notes there. Maybe even just publish the notes there.
Yeah, that'd be pretty nice.
That'd be great.
Yes.
Right? Because then you just see the major release notes. You don't have to go hunting around.
It's funny as you're talking about this. I'm thinking like one of the benefits of Ember is we get to make a ton of assumptions.
Yes.
Because we know how everyone's code is structured. And this is a perfect example of, hey, we can make big assumptions here.
Right. Is there anything in Rails and gem files that do this kind of stuff for you, or was it a similar situation where you're just hunting around readmes when big upgrades were going on?
Yeah, I mean, most gems will, the only time I really worry about updating them is between major Rails releases. So every 2 years or so.
Right.
So it's not, you do still hunt around, you do look at change logs. You look at Ruby gems for like the compatible versions.
What about deprecations? Like if you were to just pull a project and gem install and then, like the factory girl, the factory bot, they printed some deprecations in the console, I think.
I don't, so Rails does a really good job with deprecations. Like, hey, this thing is going to be removed in a future release, which basically tells you you've got like 2 years to deal with it.
Right.
I usually address those right away.
Right.
Which I can't remember the last time a gem gave me a deprecation. I'm sure there are gem authors that use deprecations.
Right. I know like Luke does with modal dialogue. He'll say you're using an outdated API.
That's
which
awesome.
It's great.
Really,
It's really great.
And also we like to treat deprecations as basically errors.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll debate this a little, but
but I think it's a good to strive for as an ideal,
Yeah.
to get rid of those things, because you just learn to ignore them and then they bite you later.
Yep. And they're pretty easy to deal with, right? They take
a lot of times there's even a code
digging.
mod that does it for you,
Yes. Yep.
So anyways, I just thought that was interesting, thinking about how easy it is, how important keeping software up to date is, how easy it is for like iPhones, even OS X, and then how it's such a big deal. And the really reason that made me think about it is that we used to dedicate a lot of time for Ember upgrades, especially with our bigger apps at our previous jobs. This upgrade was so easy for me and so much changed. And a lot of that was because of the code mods and this smart kind of AST crawling that they're doing. I mean, a lot of this stuff has made it very easy. And I was like, it could be even easier, even less intervention from me.
This is another point is like us and most listeners, we're like huge Ember nerds. So we want to stay up to date.
Yeah.
Like we're always following this stuff.
Yeah.
But there's probably a lot of folks out there with Ember apps that they don't have time to do this.
Yeah.
There's too much product work.
Yep. Definitely. I mean, I've definitely been there at previous jobs.
So the easier we make this, the easier we make the better we make the entire Ember ecosystem. What is it? It's falling into a pit of success,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yep. Again, I think about how Apple always talks about versus Android, what percentage of users are on the latest iOS. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, it means you get more features. You're on a stable code base. So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Nice. Okay, so I'm thinking of working on a new video, and usually whenever I have an idea for a video, we sort of talk about it. Figured we'd do it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Just sort of expose our process a little.
Nice.
So the idea is recently I've been thinking about sort of the upfront cost of Ember and how it leads to a better code base, a better application, shipping faster, better user experience, all the goodies that we're all aware of. But there's an upfront cost. I think it's a pretty big upfront cost. And sort of that's what I want the topic of this video to be. So there's some, first of all, you have a whole nother app.
Right.
If
you're building, exactly the first thing I thought about. You have to set up 2 apps now.
So you have different deployment. You have,
dependency package managers and dependency system.
I mean, if you're doing, if you're building a front end in something like Rails, it's a whole new programming language.
Right. Right.
So there's that, and then there's also you need to set up some base components. So you're not just going to be writing HTML. You're not just going to be writing CSS. You might set up some form components, some UI components, and that has an upfront cost. And I think these things, obviously I think these things pay off.
Right.
They let you move faster later on down the line. But there's, this big cost. So I just wanted to I don't know, what are your thoughts on a video like this?
Yeah. Would you be thinking just a video just to kind of share your experience and knowledge around it?
Yeah. So some of the things form component is always a big one. Form component, there's always, a week or 2 of just thinking about the form API, all the forms that are going to be used.
But it's something, if you take the time to do it, it just pays so much dividend. I mean, once you do it right, you would never write an app without it again, basically.
Yes, absolutely. And when I'm working on a feature in an application that has these good components, I know exactly what components, how they compose.
I also think about tests, the time it takes to get the test data set up in a way that's good.
Yeah, the Mirage config, the factories.
Right, but once you have that, adding a feature, you have an existing test suite, you can just make sure you can just code really quickly and know that you're actually building the correct thing.
Testing's a good one, because if I was building a UI in Rails, it would have very little testing around it.
Yeah.
Right. Most of the testing would be at the controller or, HTTP level,
right,
the unit level, but not on the UI.
What's the audience for this?
I was thinking people why would you choose Ember? Why you should choose Ember? Things to be
versus React or versus.
I was thinking more. Let me back up a little. Should I use Ember for my project?
Right.
And here are some of the trade-offs.
Right.
Here are some of the upfront costs of Ember.
Right.
There's some obvious ones like the programming language, the whole new app, but there's some other ones I think how those components that you always use, building those.
How you get those abstractions right to make you actually productive, so you actually see the benefits of Ember. Yeah.
And infrastructure is a good one.
That's a big one.
How you deploy your app.
If you're a team and you've never deployed an
Ember app,
Ember app, that's big.
Yeah.
If you don't understand cores and branch deploys and your API, reverse proxy. Usually we end up using a reverse proxy.
I was going to say we never use cores. We always have a reverse proxy in front.
But just knowing why, knowing all that stuff, there's just a lot there.
Yes.
A lot.
Right. It's a single page app isn't just an HTML file on a web server somewhere. Right. There's a lot. Yeah.
Right. If you have a mechanism for rolling back your other
versioning, rolling back.
Yep.
Yeah. You said branch deploys. Yep.
It's all new when you're dealing with an Ember app.
And
there's solutions for it. There's good solutions for it, but you have to know them.
Yeah. These things too, you don't have to solve these all on day one. But they're definitely things you don't want to leave them to the day before you deploy to production.
Right. I wonder, would you talk about it'd be interesting to think about which things from this list are incidental to Ember and which you'll end up solving in your own way, even if you don't use Ember. So,
so the component thing, that's definitely something that you'll end up solving your own way.
And probably in a worse way than if you just use Ember components.
Way worse.
Way worse.
Yeah. Because you're going to want a reusable button.
Right.
So why not start with a framework that acknowledges that?
Exactly. But then there's other things that might be, harder, or just as a result of like Ember's development over the 5 or 6 years it's been around,
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I've heard people say things like, "Oh, I know, I'm familiar with MVC, so I'll pick up Ember right away."
And it's really, you got to learn the way to do it,
right,
the way the framework wants and the ecosystem wants. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think it could be useful. I think getting the audience right would be important here. Like, if you're talking to someone who's kind of uses Ember, if you're talking to someone who's like a Java developer who's never done much UI work, if you're talking to someone who's like knows about React.
Yeah, I was thinking more someone that's like well informed. They don't have a lot of experience in all these areas, and they get a new app and they're like, I want my team to build it using Ember. Mm-hmm. Should I use Ember?
Mm-hmm. Right. Part of this sounds like it's maybe setting their expectations correctly.
Oh yeah.
Because when they actually, let's say they do choose Ember and they go to use it, for them to be successful with it, like what are their expectations, right?
Yes. Yep.
Because if you don't plan for things like deploys and all this stuff, it could slow you down. It could surprise you in ways you weren't expecting when you said, "Oh, I guess we'll choose Ember instead of X."
Another thing is like what's the maintenance development lifecycle of this application look like? Is this like a throwaway app, or is this something that 5 developers are going to work on for the next 5 years?
Right.
So
that would affect the decision.
Yeah,
it should. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think Ember, that upfront cost in Ember lets you maintain the app. If you're not going to maintain the app and you pay the upfront cost, you just wasted a bunch of resources. So.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
All right. I think it needs some work.
We'll round it out a little bit. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.